Let me know when you have hit the record button, then I'll start.
Yeah, go. Let's go.
Namaste everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Today's topic is the psychotic Jesus. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please do not type anything in the chat window because I'm presenting from my iPhone and it becomes really hard to look at my presentation as well as look at everyone's chat at the same time. What we will do towards the end, when we open up for Q&A, at that time, every one of you can ask your questions, but keep the questions relevant to today's topic first. And then if you have more time, we'll take all the general questions related to Christianity. And the topic for the day, the psychotic Jesus. There's a bit of transition time. Hold on. Okay. The first question that comes to your mind is, was Jesus really psychotic? And most of you would be surprised that this question even came up. So let's start with the definition of what is psychosis and what does it mean to be a psychotic person. Okay. So psychosis is a symptom. Psychosis is not a disease in itself. When we say something psychosis, what we mean is the person loses touch with reality. He may hear things, he may see things that do not exist, and he may also believe in imaginary things that may not really exist. Now, psychosis can be caused by a lot of conditions, some of them very temporary in nature. For example, if you are under certain drugs, or if you are taking some entheogenic substances and you go on a trip, then you may experience symptoms that are very similar to psychosis, because you may be seeing things like ayahuasca, right, is one of those. It's a South American Native American rite in which they take the entheogenic substance called ayahuasca, and then they experience the goddess ayahuasca, and in those trips, the visions they get are not those of reality, but the symptoms are very similar to psychosis. However, psychosis can also be a symptom when you are suffering from a psychiatric condition, when you are mentally ill. So a psychotic person is someone who is mentally ill and hence displays symptoms of psychosis. So the first point here is Jesus was psychotic. And we are not the first persons to raise this question. This has been asked from the very beginning, even from the time the New Testament was written. The very family of Jesus suspected that he may be mentally ill. They did not know psychosis. The ancient people did not know a lot about psychiatric conditions that we know of today. But they could recognize that something was abnormal. And they started wondering whether Jesus was psychotic. So there is one incident in the New Testament. I have given all the verse numbers, which you can read here. But there is one incident where Jesus visits a home, and then a large crowd gathers around that home. And the immediate family members of Jesus begin to wonder whether Jesus has gone mad. Okay, and then they want to call an exorcist who is around nearby to exorcise Jesus and to cure him of his mental conditions. So his immediate family suspected that Jesus was mentally ill, and Coindra Dels, the distinguished scholar who has done some commendable work on Christianity in recent times, has also talked about this incident. And all of those references are in my books and other writings. But the point I wanted to highlight here is even the immediate family members of Jesus suspected that he was abnormal, he was suffering from a mental affliction, and he needs some kind of a care. And the only care they had was the exorcist in those days, because the ancient people, especially in the Judeo-Christian world, in Palestine or Israel, they thought that mental illnesses are caused by demons, by Satan, by the devil. And hence the way to cure that illness was to call an exorcist who will perform miracles or faith healing, and he will chase the devil from the minds of the person who is afflicted. So the immediate family thought that Jesus could be mentally ill. In the 19th century, there was a Christian minister, a Scottish minister. His name was John Duncan. And Duncan wrote a book, given the name there, but then in the book, Duncan talks about three conditions. Either Jesus was a liar, or he was lunatic, or he is son of God. He comes up with all of those three possibilities. Then he dismisses that he is either a liar or he is a lunatic, and not on the basis of any reason, not on the basis of any evidence. He simply concludes that if Jesus is Son of God, he would have behaved exactly the way he did. He would have said and uh, uh, said the things that are attributed to him, and then others would have thought of him the way they did in the New Testament. That's because he is the Son of God and he cannot be a liar, he cannot be a lunatic. However, he asked the right questions. He came up with the wrong answer, but he asked the right questions. C.S. Lewis in 1942 brought up the same questions. He asked whether Jesus is a liar, he is a lunatic, or he is Lord. And then he concludes, once again without any reason, that he cannot be a lunatic or he cannot be a liar because he is Son of God, and hence he concludes that Jesus is divine. And in between, a lot of others brought up this question in varying fashions, and some of them dismissed those questions. But from the beginning all the way up to the 20th century, people did ask this question: was Jesus abnormal? All the narratives attributed to Jesus, all the sayings and deeds attributed to Jesus in the New Testament, they don't seem normal. So was he mentally ill? This question was repeatedly asked, although it was not evaluated from a modern scientific and medical perspective using the tools of psychiatry. One of the best research on this was done by Herman Somers. So Herman Somers is a Belgian theologian. He was a Christian priest, but he was also trained as a psychologist, and he did his PhD in psychology. And then he evaluates the character of Jesus using the tools of psychiatry. And he's a very honest man. And then he comes to the conclusion that Jesus was mentally ill, he was psychotic, and he displays symptoms that are very similar to schizophrenia, but a slightly different variant of that. It's called paraphrenia, and Herman Somers concludes that Jesus was paraphrenic. And Coenrod Elst, a wonderful scholar, and then he has written this book called The Psychology of Prophetism, which all of you must read. In that book, he takes the research of Herman Somers, he adds a lot more analysis to that, and then he discusses the psychiatric condition of Jesus, and then he comes up with the conclusion that Jesus was a paraphrenic. He displayed a psychotic condition that was very similar to schizophrenia, but slightly different from it. It's called paraphrenia. Continuing this trend, in the year 2012, a very, very good Harvard Medical School study was published. So this was led by the team of Professor Dr. Yvonne Murray and his team. And they are all neuropsychiatrists and academics working at the Harvard Medical School. And then they conducted an analysis of Jesus based on the words and deeds attributed to him in the New Testament. And then in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences, they published their observations. And I've given the reference right on top. So this was done in December of 2012. The beautiful thing about this study is, unlike Herman Somers' study, which was brilliant. Okay, Herman Somers got it bang on right. It was a brilliant study, but he did it by himself and then he published it. But the team of Harvard Medical School experts not only conducted a very rigorous study, but they also got it peer reviewed. So peer review is a process by which a study is shared with other scientists, and then they critique, they come back and they provide the feedback. And if there are any errors, any mistakes, those are corrected. And if the evidence is wanting, then you have to produce more evidence. But the objective is, at the end of the peer-reviewed study in science, the publication is credible and it can be now validated by everyone. So for more than a year, the Harvard Medical Study underwent peer review and then it was published. That's the best part of the study. This came out in 2012. I talk about this in my book. I also talk about this in one of my blogs. And this study is the focus of today's presentation. But why did this Harvard Medical School study, why was it even conducted in the first place? The reason is, the authors, the scientists who conducted this study, they came up with a very important observation. More than 60% of the patients who are suffering from schizophrenia display a lot of hallucination-like conditions. They think they are being persecuted. They are possessed by the devil. They have hallucinations. They have hallucinations that are both auditory and visual hallucinations. And then they start imagining they are some other character. They can be a prophet. Some of them think they are gods, and some of them think they are Jesus. Some of them think they are messiahs who are out to save the world, and some of them think that they are being persecuted by everyone. So what they found was 60% of these patients who are suffering from schizophrenia suffer from these kind of psychotic conditions and these kind of hallucinations. Now, how do you convince the family of someone who's schizophrenic that what your son or what your daughter, mostly it's son, what your son is going through is an abnormal mental condition. He is not Jesus, he is not son of God, he is not a prophet, he is not a messiah, he is just imagining all these things. And more importantly, how do you get medical care across to these people? If Christians worship a person who displayed exactly the same symptoms. Can I request everyone not to chat? Please, we all know that you have joined the call. Please don't chat. And it's very hard for me to follow otherwise. Thank you. And then, how do you convince someone that your son is suffering from schizophrenia and he is mentally ill and he is imagining things that are not real, if you are also worshipping at the same time Jesus, who displayed the same conditions? So it's with this objective, the scientists at Harvard Medical School started conducting this study, and they published this in December of 2012. They used a method called differential diagnosis. I'm not going to get into the technical definition of that, but those of you who are doctors on this panel, you would all understand what it is. But simply put, for the benefit of everyone, this is a technique used by psychiatrists today to diagnose whether someone is mentally ill or not. The reason for that is mental illness are slightly different from the ordinary pathogenic conditions we come into. For example, if you have cancer, you can conduct MRI, you can conduct other tests, and then you can find out whether you are ill or not. If you are COVID-19 positive, there are lab tests that can tell you that you are positive. But such tests, for the most part, do not exist for mental illnesses. So for mental illnesses, the way you diagnose, for the most part, is by observing somebody, by looking at the behavior, and by focusing on the reports provided by the immediate family, teachers, friends, and others. And the doctors also conduct the clinical observation in many cases. So it's through observation, they come up with the inference that somebody is mentally ill, and they decide what type of illness you are suffering from, or you're autistic, or you're suffering from autism spectrum disorder, or you're schizophrenic, etc. And the technique used for that is called differential diagnosis. And it is not a random technique. There is a very important manual called DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. That is published by the American Psychiatric Association. It gives all the conditions. And based on the conditions, the psychiatrists observe the patients, and then they take the reports from the immediate family and others, and then they correlate the two, and then they come up with the inference that this person is probably mentally ill. So there's scientists at Harvard Medical School, the neuropsychiatrists at Harvard Medical School did exactly the same thing. They looked at the narratives in the New Testament, the words and deeds of Jesus, and then they compared those with the criteria that are given in the DSM manual, and then they come up with their inference. That's exactly what we do with psychiatric patients today when they show up at the clinic, and that's exactly what the Harvard Medical School professors did when they looked at the character of Jesus as narrated in the New Testament. So what are the symptoms that Jesus displays? The very first symptom is called paranoid type thought content. So the paranoid type thought content means two things. One is the person believes that he is being persecuted. Okay, the world is out to get them, and the government is after me. Okay, or even the divine forces or the satanic forces, they are all out to get me. So they always have this fear of persecution. They not only think that they are being persecuted, but they also believe that those who are their followers are also being persecuted. And second, this fear of persecution is built in the context of a grandiose delusion, meaning it's not an ordinary fear on a day-to-day setting, but this is a fear where uh, there is something divine which is happening. There's a great divine plan, and I'm acting out that plan, and then others are out to persecute me. So Jesus displayed these symptoms, and he thought that an apocalypse was going to happen very soon. It's the end of the world, and he was going to usher it in. He is going to usher in the kingdom of God, and hence the kingdoms on earth were all going to persecute him. And then not only him, but then they would also persecute his immediate followers. He talks about all of those things to his followers in the New Testament. So he talks about how he'll be persecuted, tortured, killed, and then resurrected. All of these are delusions. These are all grandiose delusions because they are all intended to prove that Jesus is the person ushering in the kingdom of God. All of these symptoms are narrated in many biblical verses in the New Testament, and I have summarized the verses here, and we are not going to go into every one of the verses here, but that's for your reference, so you can go and read up. But I'm going to highlight some of the most important traits that Jesus displays in terms of paranoid type thought content. First one, he says that I have come to obliterate peace on earth, and I am going to separate families. And why does he say that? Because he thinks the world is going to end, and that means why do you focus on your family? In a verse in the New Testament, he says a person comes to Jesus, he's a disciple of Jesus, and he says, my father has died, and can I go and bury him? And Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. You come and follow me. Okay. So the entire message of Jesus is, don't worry about your family. I am here to, don't worry about peace. I am here to get rid of the family and peace, and just follow me. And Jesus repeatedly promises, if you follow me, if you obey me, and if you die, if you happen to die for me, then I'll give you eternal life in heaven. And he talks about him getting persecuted, killed, and then resurrected. And the very final scene, before Jesus is arrested, Jesus comes riding on 2 donkeys into Jerusalem. He goes to the temple. He overturns the tables of money changers who are doing a legitimate work there. Because in those days, pilgrims came from around the world, and then they would have brought currencies, different currencies, right? And how do you buy something to sacrifice in the temple if you don't have the local currency? So the money changers played that role. The people will bring money from elsewhere, they will exchange it for the local currency, which was called shekel, and then they will go and buy a goat or a fowl or something, and then they'll go and sacrifice it in the temple. But Jesus goes and overturns those tables. So Jesus does all these things, and that's because he has come in to usher in the end of the world. And that starts with the persecution of Jesus, and he talks about that in the New Testament. And he also says that while the kingdom of God is being ushered in, he will be first crucified, but then his disciples will also be persecuted by everyone, and then eventually the kingdom of God will come. And he says, if you have seen me, you have seen God. He equates himself with God time and again. In the Gospel of John, he says, Father and I are one. Father means God here, and he says he and God are one. So, all of these things are very grandiose delusions. Jesus says, you cannot even go to heaven unless you believe in me. So, these are all grandiose delusions, and along with this come the theme of persecution. And both of these things Jesus displays. And according to the DSM manual, he was displaying PS type behavior or paranoid type thought content, and he meets the qualification. And very importantly, DSM stipulates that you should display this for a year or longer, and Jesus does the same. The second symptom is auditory and visual hallucinations. Jesus begins to hear things that nobody else around hear. And then he begins to see things that nobody else around him see. To give an example, let's say all of you go for a music concert, right? There are 100 of you in that music concert, and every one of you will be hearing the same thing, and every one of you would be seeing the same things. It's nearly impossible that you would be hearing something totally different from what the person next to you is hearing or seeing. Well, you can miss some of the things, right? And if the singer is singing a few words, you may end up misunderstanding those words, or you may not hear those words correctly, but you cannot hear something totally different. This is what happens. Jesus uh, has visions, and then he hears things and he talks about that to his followers, but his followers around him have not heard or seen those things. I'll give a few examples of that in the Bible, but these are the verses in which all of those incidents are narrated. And the first one, that is the baptism of Jesus. So Jesus is getting baptized by John the Baptist. And during the baptism ceremony, suddenly the heaven opens, and then God takes the form of a dove. He descends upon Jesus, and then a voice is heard from heaven, and it announces that Jesus is the Son of God. There are a lot of people around him. John the Baptist, who's the baptizer, is right there. Nobody hears this. Only Jesus hears these words, and only Jesus sees the skies opening up and a dove descending upon him and a voice coming out from heaven. Nobody else hears, nobody else sees all these things. There is another incident where Jesus fasts in the wilderness for 40 days. And during that period, the devil tries to tempt Jesus. So devil and Jesus have a conversation, and Jesus gives a lot of clever answers, and the devil goes away. And once again, there are a few people around him at different points in time, and nobody has heard the devil, nobody has seen the devil. And he tells his listeners that very soon I am going to a place where you cannot follow me. And this is because Jesus is imagining, he is hallucinating about a place from where he is hearing the voices, from where he is getting the visions, and he is thinking he is moving towards that place. And then, since his followers are not able to hear or see any of the things that he is hearing and seeing, he tells them, you cannot follow me where I am going. And his followers are confused and they think, is he talking about committing suicide? This is in the New Testament itself. And he also says that he has heard the word of God, and he has been to God's abode, and he has seen that abode, and he talks to them about all these things. So, in other words, Jesus displays all kinds of auditory and visual hallucinations, which is again one of the set of criteria given in the DSM manual, and he displays these for more than 1 year, more than 1.5 years. That's the final phase of Jesus' journey, where he gets baptized by John the Baptist, and then all these incidents happen over a span of about 1.5 years, and Jesus displays these symptoms continuously under various settings for about 1.5 years. So number one, he displays PS type thought content, where he has grandiose delusions of persecution, and number two, he gets auditory and visual hallucinations. Third one is referential thought process. So referential thought process means there are ordinary incidents happening all around, but then you think that you are at the very center of those events that are happening around you, and it's because of you those events are happening, and that you can control those events. To give a very simple example, let's say you step out into the balcony of your house, and then the wind is blowing, there's a breeze, and then you can see the trees, the leaves, the branches are kind of moving. And then if you start talking to the trees and you say, hey trees, start moving, right? And then your wife and others will think, what's wrong with you? They will think you're hallucinating. Okay, they will say this is a natural event. So if there is a breeze, the trees and the branches are going to move, and you are not controlling, and they are not moving because you have said something. But people who display the referential thought process start imagining that all the natural events occur because of their powers, because of the magical powers they possess. And Jesus displays this kind of behavior. So some of those are narrated in these biblical verses in the Gospel of Mark and Luke. And one of them is Jesus and his disciples are on a boat in a lake, in a river. And then there is a little bit of waves, and then there's a little bit of turbulence, and the boat is rocking. So the disciples are naturally a little bit scared, and then Jesus talks to the waves. He asks the wave to be quiet, and then it quietens, it dies down. And of course, to be just absolutely rational, we all know that even in the ocean, waves and turbulence don't last forever. They come up and then they die down. And Jesus, uh, on the and they don't die down. You cannot talk to the waves, and then the ocean currents or the lake currents or river currents do not listen to us, and those are natural phenomena. And then we all know that, but then Jesus thought that he could talk to the waves, he could control the waves, he can quieten the waves, and he talks to them, and then the waves quieten. They quieten because of simple natural cycle, but Jesus thought he was the one who quietened the waves. And he not only does that, then he also chastises his followers, saying that you guys don't have belief in me. Look at look at me. I have now quietened the waves, and if you believe in me, you will be able to attain the kingdom of God. Jesus is in what's called the Mount of Olives, and then he talks to his disciples, and then he talks about the events that are going to unfold. He says he is going to go to Jerusalem. Okay, that was the time of the Passover festival. Passover is a very important festival for the Jewish people, and in those days, all of them, the Jewish diaspora, which lived in the rest of the world, would have all traveled to Jerusalem at that time. Whoever could, they would have traveled there. That was like, the Kumbh Mela or any other big festival we have. Literally, millions of people would have congregated in Jerusalem to make offerings at the temple in Jerusalem and then to worship. So this is called the Passover festival. And uh, Jesus is planning to go to Jerusalem at that time, and nobody would have thought of him. But he thinks he is right at the center of all the events of Passover festival. So when he goes there, he will be arrested, he'll be persecuted, he'll be tortured, and eventually he'll be crucified. And he says all of these things will happen according to ancient prophecies in the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible. Because the Jewish Bible talks about the Messiah who would be born, who would be persecuted, who would be killed, but then he will usher in the kingdom of God to everyone. Can I request everyone not to chat, please? And then, Jesus talks about this, and then he thinks he will be arrested because he is right at the center of all the events of the Passover festival. So this is another example of referential thought process that Jesus displays in the Bible. So we have seen three major categories of conditions that one must fulfill to be declared psychotic. Number one is the PS type thought content. Second one is auditory and visual hallucination. And third one is referential thought process. And all of these one must display for at least a year or longer, and Jesus meets all of these conditions as stipulated in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And that's what the scientists, the neuropsychiatrists, and practicing psychiatrists at Harvard Medical School analyzed, and they came to the conclusion that Jesus was possibly psychotic, and his psychotic condition was the result of some mental illness. They don't get into the specificity of the mental illness, and like I earlier mentioned, Herman Somers, in an independent study conducted in Europe, proposed that he was suffering from paraphrenia. Now, why is it very difficult to come up with a very specific conclusion for mental illness? Because a lot of mental illnesses share the symptoms, and the diagnosis also tends to be overlapping, and hence, as a result, it will take doctors a long time before they could conclude, pinpoint, and say this is the specific illness you are suffering from. But regardless, in the case of Jesus, that doesn't matter. It is reasonable to conclude that he was psychotic and he was suffering some kind of mental illness, which could have been paraphrenia, which could have been something similar to schizophrenia or some other form of psychosis. Okay, but he did suffer from the psychotic condition. Now, when we talk about this, and this is a very so far everything we have seen is very important, because while right from the time the New Testament was written, the immediate contemporaries of Jesus, or those who wrote the New Testament, they thought that Jesus could have been psychotic. They thought that Jesus was mentally ill. And this suspicion lingered on. We have seen the example of John Duncan, C.S. Lewis, and everyone, and many in between those. Okay, all of them thought that Jesus could have been psychotic, but what they did was they evaluated the other possibilities. Was he a liar? Was he lying about all these things? Or was he lunatic, meaning was he mentally ill? Or was he son of God? And then instead of objectively evaluating the evidence and then coming to a conclusion, they said, oh, by the way, he cannot be a liar, he cannot be a lunatic because he is son of God. They started with that premise and then they simply confirmed that premise without evaluating the other two possibilities. Whereas the Harvard Medical School study evaluates the two other possibilities. Was he a liar? Which is a value judgment. They don't pass that judgment. Instead, they look at the psychiatric evidence. They look at all the symptoms in the Bible, symptoms that are described in the Bible and attributed to Jesus. They look at all of those things and they conclude Jesus was possibly psychotic. In other words, the suspicion that has lingered on all along for the last 2000 years is likely to be true, that Jesus could have been a lunatic. At this time, you will run into a few possible objections. Some of you, these questions may have come up in your mind. So let me bring them up one by one. First question is, can you retroactively diagnose Jesus based on biblical reports? Meaning, look, if Jesus lived, he lived 2000 years ago, and all we know about Jesus comes from the Bible, and how can you take the DSM of today, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of today, and diagnose Jesus when you don't have Jesus physically present in front of us and in the psychiatrist's office? So the answer to that question is going to be first a rhetorical answer and then a more scientific answer. The first one, what do Christians do? They do exactly the same to conclude that Jesus is divine. They take the narratives of the New Testament, the Bible, and then they go back to a person they have never met, and then they simply conclude that Jesus was divine based on everything stated in the Bible. By the same yardstick, if you can come to that conclusion about a person whom you have never met, for whom no evidence exists, and you can simply arrive at this conclusion based on the narratives in the New Testament, then you can also come up with other inferences, other conclusions, which are actually more robust and which are more reasonable based on that. And number two is, it is perfectly reasonable to perform a psychiatric evaluation of a character who is not present in front of the psychiatrist today. The reason for that is, as I mentioned right at the beginning of this talk, psychiatric illnesses are quite different from other illnesses because you often do not have lab tests. In some rare cases you do, but in most of the cases, you do not have laboratory tests to confirm that somebody is mentally ill. So many of the times, the observations are made based on narratives. The narratives given by the testimony of others. For example, the family members come back and say, hey, you know what, my son is talking to himself and he's hearing things and he says he's having conversation with these imaginary figures. What is happening with him? Then the doctors start looking at other things. And then they ask for the report from the teacher. And the teacher says, that's true. When I'm conducting the class, he is not paying any attention. He is living in a world of his own. And sometimes you can see him talking to himself. So what they are doing is primarily the psychiatrist is looking at reports and testimony provided by others. Now, if Christians insist that the New Testament is a testimony of the acts and words of Jesus, then the psychiatrists are perfectly reasonable in using that as the primary source to evaluate whether he was mentally ill or not. And this is the explanation Evan, Marie, and other professors provide in their peer-reviewed publication. Number one. Number two, you would be wondering, if Jesus did not exist, in the last few talks we had, that's the point I was highlighting. If Jesus did not exist, how could he have been psychotic? That's a pretty good question. And two answers for that, right? Number one, Professor Murray and others do not focus on that question. They started the premise that Jesus existed and that the New Testament is a testimony of the events and deeds that Jesus performed. And if that is the case, was he mentally ill? And then they come to the conclusion, yes, he was. Now, if Jesus did not exist, how did all these narratives come into existence? So I discuss that in my book, and then I come up with a very different proposition. So Jesus need not have existed. However, the early Christianity was a very secretive cult. That's why you'll find even in the New Testament, Jesus says don't talk about this to anyone, keep this a secret. So those kind of conversations happen repeatedly in the New Testament. And even the pagan writers mention that the Christians are very secretive. They congregate inside the houses of some of the believers, and then we do not know what really is going on. So it was a very secretive cult. And oftentimes, as I mentioned in one of the previous calls, um, um, in those times, many of the Jewish people, Christianity was born amidst the Jewish setting, and many of the Jewish people believed in the apocalypse. They thought the world was going to come to an end, and then that Messiah would arrive, and then he would save uh, the Jewish people from destruction, and then he will also usher in the kingdom of God, and then take on the enemies of the kingdom of God. So this belief was very prevalent. However, not everybody would have believed in these things to the same degree. There are some people who would have taken these beliefs very seriously, and most others to varying other degrees, and even with some degree of skepticism. So who are the people who would have taken such beliefs very seriously? These are the people known as functional schizotypes in psychiatry. A functional schizotype is a person who can generally function normally. Okay, he can go to stores, he can work, and he can study, and he can interact with others. But he also has a mild form of psychosis. So that means most of the time that psychosis is limited to that tendency to believe in supernatural things and these kind of apocalyptic messages that the world is going to come, and then slip into delusion to some degrees. So the proposal I put forth in my book was that the early Christianity was entirely created in the midst of small secret congregations of functional schizotypes. And these people were delusional to a small degree. They were never normal, but then they could be functional, and hence they are known as functional schizotypes. And the entire belief, and then the character of Jesus, and all the words and deeds attributed to him, all of those arose in the midst of these secret and small congregations of believers in early Christianity. And hence, that's the reason you find these kind of very psychotic narratives attributed to this imaginary character called Jesus. The next objection you would have is, are we judging Jesus by modern standards? This is a very tempting answer people will put forth, not only in this condition, but in lot of scenarios when religions are discussed. So for example, when we criticize Islam, most of people would immediately jump in and say, you know what, we should not criticize the behavior of the Prophet Muhammad based on our notions of equality today. Okay, but that to me is not an acceptable explanation, because morality is not time-based. If something is right today, it would have been right 2000 years ago. If something is wrong today, it would have been wrong 2000 years ago. But more importantly, psychiatric observations or any medical observations are still true, regardless of whether they are observed today or whether they were observed 2000 years ago. To give an example, which the Harvard scientists bring up, they bring up the example of Sushruta. So he was an Ayurvedic physician, and then 2000 or 2500 years ago when he wrote, he talks about a physical condition where he says the urine tastes sweet. And of course, you don't have to have the patient in front of you, and then you don't have to worry about modern standards and ancient standards, and you can tell that he is talking about diabetes mellitus. Okay, that's why the urine is tasting sweet. So likewise, there are conditions called kadaga. Okay, kadaga is the word used, it's a Sanskrit word used for cancer. And once again, based on the narrative, you can draw the inference that somebody is suffering from, somebody in the ancient time suffered from cancer. And coming to Jesus, a lot of the psychiatric conditions, the narratives that are attributed, are true today, and they would have been true 2000 years ago. So the objection of applying modern standards to evaluate Jesus does not hold water. And finally, Christians have two choices. Either they have to agree that Jesus did not exist, that he was a mythical character, or they have to admit that Jesus was psychotic. In either case, it's not worth following Christianity. Either Christianity is a product of myth, or it's a product of mental illness. And neither of those conditions are sufficient enough for Christians to believe in that religion and to be Christians. With that, I'll close today's presentation and I'll open up for questions. And I have a request. I think, Rajiv, I think you are going to kind of prioritize who is going to ask the questions first. But my request is your first question should be related to today's conversation. That's number one, today's topic. And if there are any general questions, we'll take those at the end. And number two, keep your questions really brief, 10 or 15 seconds so that everyone gets to ask question. And please don't go into a lengthy, preamble before you ask your question. Thank you. With that, Rajiv, back to you.
So thank you, Kalabhai, for a wonderful exposition on the character of Jesus. I will actually ask the first question. And there is a lot of pushback, even organizing this session. There is something in the Hindu mind that really stops them, that makes them really, very uncomfortable asking these questions or getting into. Just tell us, and I'm pretty sure you have had your own experiences with such people, but it's like all over. Even in a group of like 500 people, you get this pushback that, hey, why are you looking at this character of Jesus? Can you just briefly go over, diagnose the Hindu mind? And, what could be the
Sure.
causation of this, uneasiness?
Sure. So that is a couple of things, right? One is dimitude, okay? But I'm going to frame my answer in the context of today's topic, right? There is one called Hindu dimitude, okay? So Hindus have been colonized for nearly 1,000 years to varying degrees, right? Sometimes in some regions it was continuous colonization, first by the Muslims, then by the Christians. In some other places, it happened and then they were free for some time and again they got colonized again. So long story short, Hindus have been dhimmys for a long time, and hence they often don't display the courage to evaluate reality. That's number one. But I think a more important reason in today's context is what in neuroscience is called cognitive dissonance. Okay, that's exactly what Abhishek Bansal is asking the question, but I request everyone not to chat now. Okay, please, you will get a chance to ask your questions. So it's called cognitive dissonance. Okay, people immediately say many saints in Hinduism also displayed these conditions. And one of the things that I've often been asked is, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa displayed very similar symptoms. Okay, I do not know whether he displayed those symptoms. I'll be very clear here. Okay, because one of his disciples, Gupta, I don't recall his full name, he was the one who compiled the initial episodes, okay, of the life and deeds of Ramakrishna, and then he attributed a lot of things about Ramakrishna going and meeting Muhammad, and he's living on a tree like a monkey and all these things. So all these things he narrates. Okay, but most of the Hindus, the way they think is, in neuroscience it's called cognitive dissonance. Okay, what does it mean? It means when you hear a truth, if the truth threatens your long cherished and long held belief, then it produces dissonance in your mind. Okay, then instead of dealing with that truth, what you should ideally do is, okay, here is the evidence, and maybe the belief I all along held in my mind is not a valid belief. People don't do that. Okay, many people immediately say, you know what, this cannot be true. This cannot be the evidence that will debunk my belief. There has to be a different explanation. Okay, there has to be something else. Okay, so due to cognitive dissonance, there is a tendency to dismiss evidence. So in the case of Hindus, that's exactly what they will do. Many Hindu saints displayed this kind of these kind of symptoms. Okay, I don't think that is the case, because first of all, you have to make a very, very comprehensive case. That's what the Harvard neuropsychiatrist did. Okay, that's why I was not going into any other study. I picked this most robust and rigorous study. And what they did was they looked at DSM, and then they looked at all the words and deeds attributed to Jesus. They evaluated very rigorously, and then they went through more than 1 year of peer review. They finally published everything in the very prestigious Journal of Neuropsychiatry. And nothing of that sort exists for any Hindu saint. Okay, I'm absolutely confident that you cannot make a very similar case for every one of them. Can I request everyone not to ask questions in chat? Please hold back. Okay. And then the first thing is such kind of evidence and such kind of analysis is impossible to perform on any Hindu saints because they did not display these symptoms of the psychosis which Jesus displayed in the New Testament. That's number one. Number two, what if they did? If somebody said, what if everything that is attributed to Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is true, and then he was actually hallucinating and he was psychotic, okay, then we should follow the evidence. Okay, that is honesty. Okay, that is what Hinduism is all about. Okay, so Hinduism is a system based on pramana, okay, where we look at evidence and then we arrive at a conclusion. If a Hindu saint displayed all of these symptoms, one is PS type thought content, auditory and visual hallucination, and then referential thought process. If we did all of those things, then we must honestly conclude that that particular Hindu saint was psychotic as well. But we cannot start with the apprehension or insecurity. Oh, wait a minute. If we go and evaluate Jesus scientifically, and if it turns out that Jesus was mentally ill and that he was psychotic, what if somebody applied the same to our own Hindu saints, to Ramakrishna or somebody else, and concluded, and hence I will dismiss the evidence. Okay, I will stop evaluating Jesus. So Rajiv, back to your question, why Hindus don't do this? Why they become very uncomfortable when we evaluate Jesus scientifically, rigorously, and reasonably, is this reason. Okay, they are afraid that some of this behavior may have been applicable to Hindu saints too, and then the moment we point a finger at Jesus, somebody else can point their fingers at our own Hindu saints. But like I said, I don't think these conditions apply to any of the Hindu saint, not even to Ramakrishna, and hence, even if it did, then we should not shy away from that, because at the end of the day, truth matters and over everything else.
Yes, yes, wonderful. Thank you. And just to add to that, that Hindu saints go through a system of adhyatma so you cannot have similar, apprehension. And if the truth is the truth, then it is the truth. And if the Hindu saint has those attributes, then they are that. So with that, I'll go to, and you have to raise your hand in to ask your question, and I'll go in order. So I'll unmute, and then so you can ask a question. Okay, next question is from Devesh Pandit.
Go ahead, Deveshji.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
In the context of we have heard the stories of Jesus traveling to Tibet and having
sorry.
religion.
My apologies. Sorry to interrupt. Please. I told multiple times the first question should be related to today's topic. Okay. Then, if you have time,
That's what I'm coming.
we'll go back.
Yeah.
We'll go to
That's what I'm coming to. That's what I'm coming to, sir. Let me explain my question.
No. Please don't
give
explain. Please kindly let me. Sorry to interrupt. Don't explain. Keep your questions brief. Not a lot of preamble. Just ask that.
So the religious experiences that we compare that Jesus is compared with, and then we compared with Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and there could be number of religious persons like Nanak, Kabir, and all other persons that we can put, like Mira and so on. I can put n number of people. Comparing to that, if somebody comes to us and says, what about that experience versus this experience? Why you are comparing this in this manner? So I'm not a psychology student, so I cannot explain in psychological terms. But this is my puzzle, that if somebody puts in that context, then how do I answer? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So the question is, we are evaluating Jesus using the tools of psychology, and it's not we who are doing, right? It has been done by Harvard Medical School. And what if somebody came back and said, let's say a Christian comes back and says, what about Ramakrishna? What about Kabir? What about Guru Nanak and many other saints? And, they also displayed the same behavior. No, the answer is they have not displayed a very similar behavior. So the criteria are threefold. Number one, PS type thought content. Number two, auditory and visual hallucination. Number three, referential thought process. And all of these things, there have to be a lot of words and deeds attributed to that person that confirm all of these things. All the three must be confirmed, number one. Then number two, this behavior should have lasted for a long enough period, for 1 year and longer, according to the DSM manual. And if those two are met, those two categories of conditions are met, only then can we conclude that somebody is psychotic. Now, our answer to everyone should be, when they say that, look, you are most welcome to make your case. Okay, what we have done is, in the case of Jesus, the Harvard Medical School scientists have taken his life. They have examined it very thoroughly, and it has gone. Kindly don't interrupt, please, and please mute yourself. Okay, and then our response should be, in Harvard, the Harvard Medical School neuropsychiatrists have taken the life and deeds of Jesus, and then they have examined everything according to DSM, not according to any other random parameters, but according to DSM, exactly how the psychiatrists evaluate a mental patient. And then they have published it in a peer-reviewed study in a very prestigious journal of neuropsychiatry. And it's based on that conclusion, based on that very rigorous process, which lasted for more than a year, these scientists have concluded that Jesus was possibly psychotic. And you should tell them, now, if you think Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or Guru Nanak or Kabir or anyone is could have been psychotic, go and do this rigorous study, okay? Because then you can come back and make the case. But right now, there is only one certified mental patient, that's Jesus. And let us focus on discussing about him. And if you thought Kabir or somebody was a mental patient, then you have this Journal of Neuropsychiatry, go ahead and conduct your study. And I can assure you, they won't be able to make a case the way the Harvard neuropsychiatrists have made a case for Jesus, because you have to meet all of those three conditions: PS type thought content, auditory and visual hallucination, and referential thought process. All of them confirmed and corroborated by multiple incidents in the life of that person, and more importantly, lasting for at least 1 year or longer.
Yeah. Shobha Swami is next.
Namaste. Excellent. I've been following for the last 3 weeks. Question is, how do we take all the material we listen every week, and how do we make it ours? How do we apply it to ourselves? Like, for example, today's material, if we focus on, what should be our viewpoint, because we are doing a lot of different things. So you are the expert, and we want your opinion on how common Hindus can apply it to themselves. Thank you.
That's a great question. So just to summarize for the benefit of everyone, how do we take all these classes, the content from these classes, and how do we contextualize in our own settings, right? So for example, when you have conversations with other Christians, okay, when, let's say, Raji always brings up this very good analogy of when Christians are trying to convert you, when missionaries come knocking on your door and they try to convert you, how do you respond to that? Okay, so the best way to do that is, number one, you don't have to use every one of the ammunition I provide, okay, because some of them are easy to understand and, more importantly, easy to articulate, okay, and some of them are a lot more difficult to understand and articulate. Okay, it's going to take you time to comprehend something, but more importantly, to articulate something. Something like whether Jesus was mentally ill or not, it's going to take time. But one of the best ways to set that context is, instead of going into a lot of detailed discussion, which is important for you to understand, but when you debate with the Christians, simple answer is, when they say Jesus is Son of God and He is your Savior, your simple answer is, that's not what the Harvard Medical School has concluded. And they have analyzed Jesus, and then they have come to the conclusion that Jesus was a mental patient. Okay, and in fact, they have not done it for any Hindu saint or any Hindu god or goddess. The only one for whom they have done are Jesus and few other biblical characters like the Apostle Paul and Moses. But since we are talking to Christians, our answer is, are you familiar with this study? Because it has been published and it has been pretty effectively demonstrated that, Jesus is mentally ill. So you guys should first go and challenge this medical opinion before you claim that Jesus is the Son of God. So my response would be, keep it at two levels. One is with someone who can understand and who is open-minded, who wants to look for the evidence. What you can do, understand the particular argument and all the evidence yourself, go back and read on those, and then you can articulate it in your own language, which is always the best. But for those who you are confident is not going to be open-minded and who is not going to look at the evidence, your response should be a rhetorical response. You should just say, well, you are claiming that Jesus is Son of God, but then Harvard Medical School has shown that he was a mental patient. Okay, so your Son of God should be in a mental asylum today, and then he should not be worshipped. So that's the way I would respond to that.
Yeah, thank you. Manish Singh is next.
Manish?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Namaskar. Great presentation. I have just one question, quick question. How do I align with the 2020 findings in neurochemistry, epigenetics, endocrinology, and everything around it? The book you have continuously keep coming in the name of psychotic is based on classical physics, and it is totally outdated in 20 years after big data, artificial intelligence, and lot many things. I can give you some reference. Classical physics and Freudian psychology is on the way out. It's not going to sustain for more than 2-3 years. I can give you hundreds of evidence. So I can't take this to my friends who are Christians. I can't talk for them 5 minutes.
No. So I understand. Okay, so let me interrupt.
And the reason I have kept it short, because I can talk much more, but this is your forum. I want you to convince me how I can align with modern findings. People are talking about consciousness. So when you say imagining, one last line, when you say that Jesus was imagining, even you and I are imagining that we are human. Basically, we are not human. We are a species sensing experience having all the moment. You are imagining you are human. This is the modern understanding of science. So now
that is okay. Just to be absolutely clear. Okay, so thanks for the question. The question is, Manish ji asked whether we are using the old Freudian psychology, which is on its way out to evaluate Jesus. The answer is no, absolutely not. Okay, so DSM is not Freudian psychology. So Freudian psychology is more than a century old. Okay, that's not what is used here. So the modern neuropsychiatry, that's why right at the beginning you should have seen the name of the journal in which it was published. It's the Journal of Neuropsychiatry. It uses DSM-4. And this is the most modern neuropsychiatric tool used by not an ordinary person. It's used by the most leading professors and neuropsychiatrists at Harvard Medical School. Okay, so first we are not using any old psychoanalysis from Freud or anyone. So the first assumption you made is an incorrect one, and we are using the most cutting edge modern science. Okay, insofar as neuropsychiatry is no, please don't unmute. Hold on, let me finish my response, then you can ask if there is a follow-up question. Okay, so first one, we are using the most cutting edge modern science in neuropsychiatry to come up with an evaluation of Jesus. And now this has not been done by some random scientist. It has been done by the scientists at the Harvard Medical School. And number two, it has not been published in some random blog or somewhere. It has been peer reviewed and published in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry. Okay, and this is as authentic as it gets. That's number one. Number two, you brought up the other question of, are we all imagining ourselves to be human beings? So this one comes from mostly from quantum physics. Okay, so there is something called, I'm not going to get into a lot of those details. Quantum entanglement and all these things are there. But then the long story short, there is an there is something called a quantum reality, which may exist. And then in this quantum reality, we all could be a computer simulation. Okay, this is one of the hypotheses that has been put forth by some of the quantum physicists, which is, there could be a different race, that could be a different intelligence, just created a whole set of what we call computer simulations, and then we are all just characters in those computer simulations. Now, quantum science does not make the rest of the science, particularly neuropsychiatry in this case, irrelevant or make it go away. Okay, in the very first place, for most of these quantum studies, we don't have any evidence. Those are very interesting hypotheses. Like, for example, there was a recent study on quantum robin, and how it uses what we understand from string theory to be the vibrations to navigate. So some of those things are kind of, science is just scratching at the surface of how quantum entanglement could be happening, so that something is at two places at the same time. All these things are beginning to happen, but you do not still evaluate the physical reality using quantum science, quantum mechanics, or anything. So all of that is absolutely true at the level of subatomic, at the subatomic level, and all of that is true at the level of string theory and other dimensions. But when you are participating in something, let's say you are in a surgery room, they don't say, hey, this is a quantum reality, and hence, you are entangled, you are at two levels, and hence it's not going to happen. Okay, so that's the simple point. And now, to conclude really quick, your assumption that we are using outdated science is absolutely wrong assumption. Okay, we are using the most cutting edge modern neuropsychiatry, and the research was led by Harvard Medical School scientists and published in one of the most distinguished neuropsychiatry journals. And if you think this is outdated, here is a challenge to you. Go ahead and publish a counter to that. All of the Christians would love that. Okay, this peer review study went through 1 year before it got published, because universities are afraid of offending Christianity. Okay, and when you point out this is outdated science, you will become a celebrity, and we'll hear from you. Next question, please.
Yeah. And I'm just simply amazed how Hindus come forward to rescue Jesus. I mean, throwing quantum physics in this equation, that's how I look at this. But anyway, beautifully answered. But I'm just simply amazed.
And mainly, just to, since we talked a lot about quantum physics, right? And a lot of folks have very nicely said, these are top end, quantum physicists, right? They have said, we don't understand quantum physics. Okay, that's what, some of the very best quantum physicists and Nobel Prize winners have said. Okay, nobody really understands that. Okay, and that starts from all the way from Niels Bohr, all the way through Einstein, and all the way through, the modern quantum physicists. So a lot of times people throw these words around, and I should just let everyone know, right? I studied physics, and then I study quantum physics day in and day out, and not just at the level of popular level. I studied at the level of math. Okay, I know what I'm talking about. Okay, so people throw these words like quantum physics very fashionably at the end of very fashionably, but at the end of the day, science is a lot more rigorous. Okay, and you cannot apply quantum physics to study something in neuropsychiatry, and words like AI, big data are all thrown around irrelevantly. Okay, so, and again, those are the domains of my expertise, and sorry, you cannot use words like quantum physics to evaluate these kind of situations.
Okay, next question is from Rajesh Agni.
Yes, namaste again, Rinkerji. So this is the first time I'm hearing your talk, and just to get to the question right away, what has your experience been in your debates, let's say with the Christian scholars, about your findings here, about your analysis here, and what do you see, in your mind, if you can share, are your key next steps in terms of making this awareness grow, please?
Okay, thank you. Very good question. So the first reaction is, my style of debate is always pull no punches. Okay, I make zero concessions. Okay, so generally I debate the way Mike Tyson used to fight in the early stages of his boxing career. He wouldn't defend, he will just go and knock the other person out. Okay, that's my style of debate. I go with all the Brahmastra, okay, and then I fire it I make zero concessions. I don't care about the offended sensibilities of my opponent. Okay, that's the way I debate, and for the most part, Christians don't like it. Okay, so what they would do is either they will avoid me altogether, or they will get terribly upset. And Rajiv Verma is aware of one such debate I had a few years ago. Rajiv, that was in Houston, if I remember correctly. And then that ended up actually in tears. Okay, and some of the my opponents were debating. Those Christian opponents, they ended up literally crying. Okay, because they thought I was being very offensive to Jesus. My point is, sorry, I cannot help it. Okay, if the truth is offensive, get used to offense. Okay, and then if you don't like the heat, then don't enter the kitchen. Okay, so that's number one. So general Christian behavior is they don't like any criticism of Jesus, and Sitaram Goel talks about that at length. He says Christians will be keeping quiet so long as you are just criticizing the missionary behavior. Okay, then they'll say, oh yeah, that missionary is a bad missionary and he is not a true Christian, but we are true Christians. Okay, they like that kind of a parachute, right, to bail themselves out. But they don't like it when you criticize the Bible or when you criticize Jesus. Most importantly, when you criticize Jesus. Okay, that is a no entry zone for them. But as Rajiv said, there is no Christianity without Jesus, and there is no Christianity without the Bible. So our only weapon should be, I don't care about the missionaries. The missionaries are behaving exactly the way Jesus taught them to behave. Okay, so I have no problem with them. Okay, they are conditioned to behave this way. So I'm going right at the fountainhead, which is Jesus in the Bible, and I'm going to be critical of them, straight and simple. So can we really convince the Christians? I don't think so. Okay, because of the way religious belief forms in the mind. Okay, there is something called the criterion of persuasibility. Okay, in neuroscience. So it's very hard for you to persuade someone beyond the age of 7 or 8. Okay, and whereas our religious belief is inculcated way before that. Okay, so only a small number of people would be persuaded out of their religious belief later on in their lives. Okay, so good example, like Richard Dawkins talks about some of the studies in UK where less than 12% of the people who were raised as Christians ever come out of that religion. Okay, so so this is the bottom line, right? So even here you will find a lot of people, when I present the evidence, even our own Hindus are not saying that hey, let's look at the evidence, let's evaluate. There immediately they get into a defensive mode. What if our own saints, our own Hindu gurus are evaluated like that? So let us start denying this. Okay, so this is the exact mindset that Christians always will display. A, they will avoid you. B, they will get angry. 3, they will accuse you of being offensive, offending their sensibilities, and effectively they'll try to vilify you. Okay, that's what they have always done. Whether it is the Jewish critics, for example, Martin Luther, who lived 500 years ago, he initially was sympathetic to the Jews. He wanted to convert them. That's why he was being sympathetic. Then one of the Jewish writers wrote a book criticizing the Bible and Jesus, and Martin Luther went berserk. Okay, then he published a book called On the Jews and Their Lies. Okay, where he calls for killing the Jews, burning their schools, and all of these things. Okay, synagogues and everything. So Christians will at that stage start vilifying you. Okay, so can you convert the Christians? No, the answer is no. But then why is this kind of evaluation of Jesus important? It's important from 2 perspectives. Number one, it's to educate the Hindus. That's why the title of my book is What Every Hindu Should Know About Christianity. Okay, so you should know the true nature of Jesus, so that a lot of Hindus who mistakenly think that Jesus was a saint, he was a yogi and all these things, and who without studying science, misuse science. So those people are first educated. That's number one. Then number 2, what happens is save the next generation of Christians from Jesus. Okay, so for example, when we attack Jesus, okay, on all fronts, and when we ridicule Jesus, because ridicule is a very powerful weapon. Okay, and when we make a very simple set of memes that Jesus was a mental patient, and it goes out, and then people start reading that. So there are young kids, right? The next generation of Christian children will start seeing that. And today we have more tools at our disposal because we have all these iPhones and Facebook and all these things, where these kids are going to look at that, and then they will see, and then they will find it really hard to completely ignore that, because they are still young, and then they will start evaluating is there some truth in what is being told here? Okay, can we go and look at that? So to do that, I think what we should do is we should be able to create a lot of presentation, which are not only serious and critical presentations, but we should also be able to create presentations that are funny, that are in simple videos where people don't have to think a lot, but those are directed at the younger kids, so that we save the next generation of Christians from Jesus. So that should be our goal going forward. Did I answer your question?
The only piece maybe, and the second part of it, Venkatji, was what do you, in your mind, are key steps from your standpoint, from your vantage point? Can you share
What are the key
next steps that Venkatji, that from your vantage point, that
okay,
you personally are sort of driving?
Got it. So from my perspective, when I say it's my perspective, it's not just about what I should do. I think this is what all Hindus should be doing. The analogy I always invoke is, if a child is suffering from cancer, the first thing to do is to administer chemotherapy or radiation or whatever it takes to cure the cancer. Okay, then that's exactly why your oncologist, what she will do is, the first thing she will do is to take you off all the immunization, right? You won't get any immunization until your chemotherapy is complete. The reason is, your immunization will make all of your cells immune and they will also resist chemotherapy. But what she is effectively doing is lowering these defenses and administering chemotherapy so that the cancer cells are killed. Then your immunization is resumed and then you are made healthy from that point onward. So to me, there are two activities to be performed. One is to get rid of this cancer called Christianity. And second one is to make our own Hindus healthy. Okay, healthy in mind and thought and everything, right? Not just physically. So to get rid of Christianity, you have to focus only on Jesus and the Bible, nothing else. Okay, and then to do that, I think the first thing we should do is to create a lot of. So today, what is happening? Nobody criticizes Jesus. Okay, because of colonial rule and because of the way the West dominates the thought process around the world. And Christianity is the religion of the West. Okay, let's make no mistake about it. It has been that way for 1700 years. Okay, starting with the rule of Constantine in around 325 BC, CE and onwards. And then, so nobody criticizes Jesus, and many Hindu gurus have also made the terrible mistake of praising Jesus out of sheer ignorance and cowardice. And then, as there is a lot of Hindus think, hey, Jesus was good, and then what Christians are doing is bad, and they will go and ask silly questions like, in fact, I've seen this happen once, right? And there was a Hindu who was debating, why are you guys trying to convert us? Did Jesus ask you to convert? And then the missionary coolly answered, yes, Jesus asked us to convert. That's why we are doing it. And Jesus said, go everywhere and convert others. Okay. And they also quoted Jesus, nobody goes to heaven except through Jesus. Okay. And that's it. The Hindu was silent. So the point is, because of colonial propaganda, Jesus has been put on a pedestal. Our first job is to bring him down from the pedestal to the gutter where he belongs. Okay, so that means we have to focus our attention and attacks and ridicule on Jesus and the Bible. And it is beginning to happen in Tamil Nadu and in Andhra Pradesh. I am aware of, and I am associated with some of the team members who are at the village level, right, doing this. And then they are countering Christian missionaries, and then they are doing it in very nice way. Okay, you cannot talk about some very serious construct with them when you go, but what they are doing is they are translating this into something very rhetorical, and they take it back, but then the attack is always directed at Jesus and the Bible. Okay, I think that's the first thing we should do, because luckily today, fortunately, okay, we are, if you take in India, Hindus are still the majority. Okay, and this is the time when we can challenge Christianity, and we can challenge it only by attacking Jesus and the Bible, and pull no punches. Okay, because Christianity requires only a few decades before it becomes the majority religion. Look at Nagaland, 1971 to less than 3 decades, it became a 97-98% Christian majority state. Look at South Korea, it took them less than 2 decades or 3 decades before they became completely Christian, right? Almost completely Christian. So if we don't take on Jesus, okay, we should be prepared to cremate Hinduism. Hinduism will be dead. Okay, so that will be my takeout. Sorry for the long response, but the takeout is what should Hindus do from all these things? All of these are inputs, right? I'm providing you data points, I'm providing you arguments, I'm providing you various weapons. take the one or two weapons you think are most important and direct them at Jesus when you meet with the missionaries.
Yeah, thank you.
But more importantly, educate the Hindus with that.
Aditya Dhopadkarji, you are next.
Yes, I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yes, yes. So my question is actually a subset of three sub-questions. So sub-question one is, would the different methods of countering Jesus and Christianity that Kalawai has mentioned from his previous online Panchayat to now clash with each other in their applicability? Because deeming someone as someone who has been born and existed is required to counter him with his psychological with the profiling of his psychology, but then that may counter the historicity argument.
Correct. So
Yeah,
maybe
the second question, I'll just complete my questions. My second question is, in psychosis, in psychology, is everything clairvoyant and everything clairaudient, meaning being able to see something, being able to hear something which others don't hear? Is it all always considered complete psychosis? Because we have the question of, in Hindus, we have a bhakta in an intimate relationship with his or her ishta. So that
Right.
matrix has to be counted. Now, question number 3 is, with so many laws in place in India, how practically, logistically possible is it without getting into trouble to use these different arguments? Because we have to use them to counter Christianity and we have laws which muzzle us. My questions are completed.
absolutely great. Absolutely great questions. Let me answer all the three questions. Thank you, Aditya.
You can mute me now. Yes.
Sure. Thank you. First question, right? Some of the things I'm articulating, can they be seen as being mutually contradictory? For example, you can either argue that a historical Jesus did not exist, or you can argue he was psychotic. Absolutely correct. Okay. And of course, I give an explanation why, a psychotic Jesus came into existence, even though he was not a historical character. Okay. But you don't have to use all. So the idea of taking on Christians or even educating the fellow Hindus is you take only a small set of arguments, right? And the right thing to do is to take 1-2 reasons to reject Jesus. Okay, that's your objective. Your objective is to reject Jesus. And for that, take 1 or 2. One could be take the historical Jesus and say, hey, historical Jesus never existed and hence Christianity is bogus. Or number 2, take the argument from literary criticism, which I presented in one of the previous classes, that the New Testament is not a revelation from God, but actually it was written over centuries. There are more than 200,000 manuscript variations of the New Testament, and hence it is the most unreliable work, and Christianity is a product of New Testament, and hence it's unreliable. Or alternative number 3 is take the argument from psychiatry and say, if Jesus existed, then according to Harvard Medical School, he was a mental patient, and then, we don't worship mental patient. We care for them. We want to treat them. And if Jesus lived today, we would have given him treatment under, Narendra Modi has launched a lot of those free healthcare programs. And under one of those Hindutva programs, we would have given free treatment to Jesus, but sorry, we cannot worship him. Okay. Or number 4 could be, you can take the moral argument, take some of the teachings of Jesus. Those are all racist, hate mongering, genocidal, violent, everything. Okay. And take all of those and say, sorry, we don't go and worship somebody who taught all these terrible things. Okay. The point is, number 1, sometimes when you debate or when you even educate other Hindus, the most important thing is not to take very complex arguments. Okay. That will work with a small circle of people who want to learn the truth, but to take 1 or 2 arguments and use that to reject Jesus. That's number 1. Number 2, are some of these symptoms like clairvoyance and other things always psychotic? Okay, that was second question. Okay, so that's why at the very beginning I provided a very important distinction. Okay, psychosis is a symptom. Okay, it is not a psychotic condition is in turn caused by a lot of factors. Okay, sometimes for example, when you take entheogenic substances, okay, you can even even though a lot of people don't see marijuana or ganja as entheogenic, okay, I will very effectively decisively argue that ganja is entheogenic. Okay, and you can create a complete world which is hallucinatory. Okay, it's a hallucinogen in that perspective. Okay, if you combine it with pranayama, you don't even have to do something sophisticated. A few minutes of pranayama and then a few hits of ganja, and you can actually create an entheogenic experience that transports you into a hallucinatory world. Okay, in that sense, it's hallucinogen. Okay, so are those symptoms psychotic symptoms? The answer is yes. But the difference, very important difference, is they are very temporary in nature, and then they are induced by your entheogenic pursuit, in this case by ganja. Okay, and some of you who are familiar with ayahuasca. Okay, ayahuasca is very popular in Peru and other places in South America. Ayahuasca brew, when you take it, or take any of the DMT and then dimethyltryptamine, and then or you take any of this LSD and other things, they set you off onto this journey where you can get visual hallucinations and where you can get some of the auditory hallucinations, but you come back. It's temporary in nature. That's the major thing. Okay, it is caused by a condition which is not a psychological condition, but it is caused by a substance which is entheogenic. And in some cases, when people have had near-death experiences, right, and due to they undergo surgery or something after accidents, and they have this near-death experience, those fall into some of these categories. And then, so hence psychosis symptoms can themselves be caused by numerous cases, but the main distinction is, in the case of other substances, they are very temporary in nature, and then you are off the trip. When you start coming down from the trip, they go away. But in the case of mental illnesses, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's autism spectrum disorder, whether it is paraphrenia, whatever it is, in all of these cases, they are caused by an underlying mental illness. And how do you distinguish the two? Okay, that's where you look at those three categories. One is PS type thought content, and auditory and visual hallucinations, and the three referential thought process. And you look for a lot of evidence from each one of these. Okay, and do they happen at all times? Okay, that's why DSM stipulates 1 year or longer when this can be continuously observed. And when all of these are met, conditions are met, that's when a patient is classified as probably showing signs of psychotic symptoms based on a mental condition. So that's the main difference between the two. The last question is, in India, you have a lot of laws that will prevent us from even criticizing Jesus and even saying ordinary things. That's absolutely a valid concern, right? I'm going to bring up just two examples, Sanal Edamarukku and Ilayaraja, right? So Sanal Edamarukku is a rationalist, he's an atheist. He was born into a Christian family, but he's an atheist. And a few years ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago, there was a fraud that was committed by the Catholic Church in Mumbai. And then they said that the tears of, there was a Jesus statue, and then they said it is shedding tears, okay? And then they collected those tears, and then they sold it to everyone, and probably even some pregnant women and others, they took those tear drops and then they added it to water and they drank it, and all that nonsense happened, right? Then Sanal Edamarukku goes there, and then he finds out what is going on there. There is a gutter which is leaking, and then there is a hole in the statue which leads all the way up to the eye, one of the eyes, and then due to capillary force, this gutter water is rising up, and then it is dripping out of the ears. Okay? Jesus is not crying; it's a statue, and then it's a gutter water that's coming out of Jesus, and which is very apt. Okay, and looking at all the gutter level teachings of Jesus, it is only apt that he was also shedding tears of gutter. Okay, and then, but Sanal Edamarukku had to flee India because the Catholic Church immediately claimed that he has offended their religious sensibilities, and India being India, and Indian judiciary being what it is, they went after Sanal Edamarukku. He fled India, and if I'm correct, he is still living in Finland. Okay, he has not come back to India. Okay, and yes, India has got a lot of draconian laws that are all created by the British during the colonial period, and then ratified by the Indian government since then. All of them will allow anyone to attack Hinduism, but even say the absolutely reasonable things about Christianity or Islam, they will go after you. Okay, in that case, I think what you have to do is to that's one area where I think Hindus are found terribly lacking, right? For example, you can have a lot of these laws, completely purged, right? And then made no longer relevant, okay? But Hindus never negotiate. Look at the Christians of America. When they elect somebody, they have a set of demands, okay? It is always a quid pro quo, okay? I'll elect you as president, but when you become president, you are doing this for us. Okay. And Hindus never do that. Okay. And we elected Modi. Okay. This is the second term. And have we asked for a single demand for Hindus, okay, for Hinduism, that he could fulfill? No. Okay. And in fact, a lot of these laws are easy to pass, because all you have to do is to make an argument that, look, others are making fun of Hinduism, and but we cannot, even say the truth about Christianity. So at the end of the day, free speech matters, and hence we should be allowed to even ridicule Jesus or Muhammad or Bible or Quran and all these things. And except in some of the places where Christians and Muslims are the majority of Hindus will agree with this. And there should not be a problem getting it passed in the parliament and the Rajya Sabha. But Hindus don't demand that. And that problem can only be solved if we are ready to use our collective power to get these laws either, purged or replaced with better ones.
Okay. Thank you. We are running out of time. I have 2 more questions, and after that we'll stop taking questions. But please keep it brief. Okay. So next is Dish S.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, great talk. And I actually had 3 questions. You already answered 2 of them while answering other people. So last question is from my friend. He was also watching, saying that can we also analyze like the followers of Jesus, like you have analyzed psychotic Jesus, like even their followers are behaving quite psychotically sometimes. And one thing like what you said, like attacking the root fountainhead of this faith. So the same thing is in communism and Islam also. Like the fountainhead is when you criticize, you get like really violent hitbacks. Like, but sometimes like we have I have no idea like how to go about doing things actually. But your Facebook posts and all like little bit informative. But go on. Thank you.
That's a great question, right? So can we analyze the followers of Jesus? That's the Christians as psychotic. The answer is yes. Okay. Not everyone, but at least some of them. Okay. So we should be very careful. Most people are born into a religion. Okay. They don't embrace a religion. Okay. In other words, they have not looked at all the alternatives and they've said, hey, I have looked at all these teachings and let me now start following this. Okay. A vast majority of people, probably I would say 99 point whatever percentage, are born into a religion and they continue to follow that. Okay. So second reason is most of us human beings display what in evolutionary biology and neuroscience is called conformance bias, right? We tend to conform. Okay. That's a good reason for that, because when we lived in the Stone Age, you could be eaten away by a tiger or a lion, right? And then, or a snake can strike you and you can be dead. And the only way you went, can I go hunting for something or foraging for something? The only way you did that was by relying upon the experience of others. Somebody said, don't go there because there will be snakes, okay? Or don't go here, there will be tigers, okay? And then you listen. There was a big price you paid for not listening, because if you ventured out on your own, then there was a huge risk, okay? So you conformed. Historically and in evolution, we have tended to conform, okay? So fall in line with what others say, and hence life is easier. You are going to lead a path of least resistance. So most people, especially in congregational religions, Christianity is a congregational religion. People congregate in the same church at a particular time on Sunday every week, okay? And hence there is a tremendous amount of peer pressure from the congregation that you conform, okay? So most people will conform to that. Most Christians have never really read the Bible. They have never really critically evaluated that and all these things, right? So, and hence we should be careful about that. We should be cognizant of the fact that a vast majority of them are just conforming Christians, nothing more than that, okay? But there is a core set of Christians who are absolute fanatics, and then who really take these things to heart, and then they display symptoms of psychosis. And that's something we should not hesitate to say. And then there are a lot of good studies that have been conducted. For example, Andrew Newberg, okay, he's a neuroscientist and a professor at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, and he has published a lot of studies. Especially, he has worked on what is called as the charismatic cults of Christianity. Okay, so where they'll be handling snakes and they will talk in tongues, right? And then they'll be just blabbering. All of them will be talking in tongues in a group and all these things. And he has studied those, and he has studied the effect it has brain. It's the effects that kind of psychotic behavior has on brain. and it's a harmful effect. And very interestingly, he has also shown that when that person is taken out and put on a yoga program and meditation program for about 3 months, then they start recovering and then they start showing very beneficial effects. Okay, so yes, this is a study that has been done by somebody, at least in select pockets. Okay, and then another psychologist, Daryl Ray, has done the same things, and he has studied not only the mainstream Christianities, but also some of the, what you call the fringe movements within Christianity and charismatic cults. And some of the behavior, whether they are talking in tongues, or you take the Mormons. Okay, there is a huge Mormon church in Chennai now. Okay, and I am sure that they may have such churches in other Indian cities too. So Mormons have some of the most weirdest Christian beliefs. Okay, and then if Christianity is weird, then Mormonism is weirdness on steroids. Okay, so they have a lot of weird beliefs, and some of them used to include polygamy, which was abolished only a few years ago. But then there are fringe Mormon movements which still support polygamy, and then they'll marry off. A mother will marry off her own daughter to her husband. Okay, and all these very strange things happen, and we should. I mentioned some of those in my book, but we should take some of these things and explore, and then we should rightly conclude that those who are those Christians who are doing this kind of indulging in this kind of behavior are functional schizotypes, and then they display signs of psychosis. That's something we should absolutely do, and then take local context. That's when it's going to be most effective, and bring it up and say, look, guys, this is a mental affliction, and you are not following a spiritual path.
Yeah, thank you. Last question, we'll take it from Arvind Iyer.
Oh, thank you. So great presentation, Venkatji. Very enlightening, on a new perspective. Just had a quick question. You mentioned about this paper in Harvard. I was just wondering if we could get a reference. In case, people ask for it, we can always readily provide that.
No, it's right in the first page. I have published it here. Let me give it. Okay, you can note it down.
Maybe you already did, but might have.
Right here.
Okay, this is the one I'm seeing online. Okay, great. Yeah.
Right here. Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Most welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Kalawai, for a great program again. We look forward to the next Sunday's program. On a program note, somebody mentioned Islam. Yes, we are planning to do a similar series on Islam, educational, focused on Muhammad, Quran, Hadith, and the whole Islamic matrix, right up to the modern times, the Tablighi movement and whatnot. But let us just focus in one area first, and once we are done with that, then we'll start with Islam.
And with that, just one note to add to that, right? And many of the Hindus who are hesitant to use these kind of studies, okay, to attack Christianity, just ask yourself one question: what if the same Harvard team, the Harvard Medical School team, had studied one of the Hindu gurus, okay, whether it is Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Adi Shankara, Ramanuja, anybody, or Krishna, Rama, anyone, Shiva, and then they had concluded that Rama, Krishna, or Adi Shankara, or Ramakrishna, or anyone was psychotic. What do you think the Christians would have done? They would have used it with glee. Okay, that weapon would have been fired at every Hindu. Then they would have published in every mainstream media. They would have, telecast it in all of the social media everywhere. Okay, so now here is a Brahmastra that's being handed over to you. And then, why are you hesitating to use it? Fire it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Next Sunday, same time. Okay. Namaskar.
Thank you and dhanyavad.